and welcome to the workshop porting PowerBuilder apps to C#. Here's a little disclaimer about this session. Okay, so now let's take a look into the session agenda. First, we'll see how to separate the PowerBuilder business logic from the UI. Then we'll create a new Web API project. We'll migrate the PowerBuilder data objects to C# data models. We would be porting PowerScript functions to services and controllers. Then we will call the Web API from PowerBuilder. All this while converting your data windows to JSON data windows, call the Web APIs, and test the ported PowerBuilder app and the RESTful Web API. Okay, so here's a little bit of information about myself and about my company. Okay, so before we begin, I would like to let you know that this session would be based on a tutorial that is already available in Appian.com. So if you scroll down in Appian.com all the way down and go to documentation, and on the PowerBuilder section you scroll down a little bit, here you will find the PB2C# business porting business logic with minimum refactoring hassle. Now this is a different session than the one before, and that is because in this one we will be looking into how to actually be refactoring some of the business logic. Now in this video, since we want to make a short video for you to follow along, you can also complete this tutorial by yourself, which is basically the same that we'll be looking into, but you'll see step by step in here, one step at a time. And on this video we'll try to make it as short as possible. So what we'll be doing is that we will be looking into the ported code and just taking a quick look into the resulting of porting this business logic. So let's begin by opening our PowerBuilder application. So here we have it right here. Notice how this is PowerBuilder 2019 R2. This is a beta release, so let's open it up. Okay, so now let's take a quick look at this small application. You'll notice that this application, if I run the application, it's a basic application that's actually only has 3 data windows right here, as you can see, and one of them is for the customers, and the details for this data window, it's basically master detail relationship on the data windows. And we also have another freeform data window in here. So it's a very simple small application, but it's good enough to get us the big picture of how to do this. So I'm going to close this. Now let's take a look into the application itself. So let's see what this is actually doing. I will double click right here and you can see that we have the open event. What we are doing is that we have the 3 data windows and we're actually setting them as read-only right in here. So this is going to be opening or calling the post open event. Let's see what we have inside of it. Look, we have a data window customer retrieve. So let's see that right there. It's this one in here. So once we have retrieved this, you can see that this is calling a row focus changed event. So this event right here is actually getting the customer number and it's calling the retrieve event, the user event retrieve for the data window order. So let's see which one that would be. It's this one in here. So let's see the user event retrieve. So this is returning this retrieve event. Once this has been retrieved, it would be calling the order item reset, so then it would be resetted. So as you can see, this is basically doing retrieval of the 3 data windows one by one, and it's all basically done in the post open. That's where it begins. So the main idea, and you can see that we have the data windows in here as well. So the main idea of all this is to actually make this into an application that does not need a local database connection. So if I open up here, you'll see that it's actually using a local database connection. But this would now be transformed into a Web API application, so that my business logic is actually housed in Web APIs. So now let's take a look into how to actually do this. Now, to make this video short, I won't go into the details and won't have you look into me typing one by one of the lines of code. But instead of that, let's take a look into the next project right here. So we have created NVOs in this project. The non-visual user objects would be each one for the specified windows that we have in the main project. So as you can see, we have the order NVO, modify NVO, and order new. And we also have the customer select, as you can see right here. We have also created a new REST client user object, and this REST client user object is basically going to be having the basic stuff for me to consume the web API. So this function right here, we have all the functions that would be basic for this to actually consume my web API. Now, if you would like to take a closer look into this project, you can download this versions of this applications, and they are already available on the website on the link for the tutorial. So now let's get back into PowerBuilder. Notice how this post open event has already been commenting out the code. So I'm actually going to be converting my data windows from traditional data windows into data window JSONs, but we'll take a look into that in just a moment. So right now I have already created this into commented out this line of code, the retrieval of this data window. And what I'm doing is I have already instantiated this NVO, the main NVO, and I am calling one of its functions, the user event post open data window. So let's see what this actually does. Okay, so you'll notice that I don't have any functions in here. So that's what the main purpose of this is going to be, actually setting up the functions into my NVOs that would be calling the different retrieval methods and everything that I might need from my application. So now let's take a look at how this would actually be done once we have completed this, the step of migrating everything to NVOs. So let's take a look into the next project right in here. Okay, so now we have made the changes into my application. So let's look in here and you'll see that this is actually calling this NVO. Oh, sorry, it's not that one, it's the other one over here with its functions, and you'll see that the functions are already set up in here. So what this is actually doing, it was actually receiving a data window and setting the transaction object with the SQL CA, returning the retrieval of the data window. But then we need to make this a web API call. So we have already set that up. We have already set up the REST client in a global variable, passing in the name of the controller and the name of the method that I want to use. So then we would be retrieving the data window with the URL. So let's take a look into how to create the web API. Okay, so now let's continue by creating the web API. I will now open Snap Develop right in here. I will create a new project. The new project is already set up as ASP.NET Core Web API. I need to select the folder where I want to save this project to. So let's select the one that we are actually looking for, and it's going to be in here. So let's put this in here. Okay, we'll click OK, and let's name it. This is going to be order demo, and the name of the solution will also be set up in here as order demo. So I will now click and this OK button. Now this is creating the project for me. Notice that this is a web API project. Let's give it just a couple seconds for this to load. Here we go. Now what it's actually doing, it's looking for all the libraries and setting up and cleaning up the project and doing a quick build for it. Okay, now that it's done, I would first of all need to create a data context. Now the data context is an object basically the same as you would have on PowerBuilder for the connection object or SQL CA. So to do that, I need to right click in here, add new item, data context, and I will place in here the name of my data context would be Appian data context. So I'll click OK. It's asking me what database I would like to connect to for this data context, so I'll just click OK. There we go. So notice that it created the data context for me. Now let's add this data context into my startup. I'll double click right here, and I'll scroll down over here. I'll uncomment this line of code, put the name of the connection object right here, or the context, data context, right there. Notice this squiggly line right here. It's telling me that I'm missing something. So I'll just place my mouse on top of it and show potential fixes. Add the using statement. There we go. And then this one is also missing a using statement. So let's click here. There we go. Now I'll double click in here and change this for my Appian sample, which is my connection string. Now you can find that in the app settings file. See, it's Appian sample. So I have placed that in there. Now I will leave some extra space right in here because we're going to be using this later on our application. So now let's continue by importing our data windows, or yes, our data windows from PowerBuilder. Now a nice feature of Appian Snap Develop 2019 R2 is that you can actually open PowerBuilder application directly from here. So I'll open PB workspace. I need to select the workspace that I want to actually be using, and in this case it's going to be this one right here. So I'm opening this up, and you'll notice that my data windows are in here, right? So I'll click in here, convert data windows to C# models. Once again, it's asking for what database connection I want to use, and this is because it's actually going to be looking for the table definitions to create the models based on the data windows. So I'll click OK and expand this. Here are the data windows that I would be exporting to my C# project. So I'll click here and I'll change the name of my folder. I want this to be a little bit more generic, so this is models. So I'll export it, and there you go. Now it's already been exported. Now let's take a look back in here. I'm reloading it. Okay, notice how this actually created a models folder for me, and inside this models folder I have my data windows already in C# and everything is already in there for me. So now let's take a look into how to create the services. So first of all, I need to add a new folder. So I'll click in here, add new folder. I'll name it services. That's where my services would be. This is where my business logic will actually reside in. So first of all, I need to create my implementations for this. So I'll create the first one. Let's begin by the first one. This would be IW customer select service. So let's do that. I'll click here. I'll add a new interface and let's name it accordingly. So let's just copy it from here. There we go. And here we have it. Now this iCustomer interface, I'll copy the code from here just to save some time for this video, and you'll see that it has already been added, but there is some changes to this library, so I'll put in the correct one. There we go. I'll save the changes. There we have it. And now that I have my first interface, I want to create the service from this interface. So I'll click right here, right click on it, add new folder, and I would be adding a new folder named implementations. This is where my real services would be inside of, and this would be implementing what I have on the other one up here. So let's name this, and well, first of all, we need to create a class and name it accordingly. Notice that the one before began with an I, that is for interface. So this one's gonna be the service. So let's click on that. Okay, I will not add the using statements. There we go. So that my models are available for me. Now I will tell this class that I will actually be doing an implementation of the interface called IW Customer Select Service. So there we go. Now I need to create a private read-only variable for the data context so that I can actually connect to the database using my data window. So I'm going to name this underscore context. Now I will create a new, here we go, this is a constructor method for my service. So I will pass in the Appian data context object so that we can actually initialize it inside of it. So here we have context equals context. There we go. So I would be saving this a little bit. There we have it. Now notice this squiggly lines. It's telling me that I haven't implemented the interface correctly. So I can fix it by implementing it right here. Notice how this created the method for me and the squiggly line goes away. So now let's get this copying the actual source code that we would be using for it. So let's copy this from another window I have open on the side, and here we have it. Now let's take a quick look at what this is actually doing. Notice right here it's actually returning a data store on the open event or open method. Now I have right here the data store that I would be declaring, naming it customers, creating the new data store based on the data object, passing in the data context, I'm retrieving it, and finally returning the data store, right? So I'll save these changes right there. Okay, so now we have created our method. Now let's take a look into creating the controller. So I'll expand this, I'll right click on it, add new item, and API controller. So let's name this controller W Customer Select Controller. That is for the window customer select that we have. So I'm going to click OK. Notice how this created all the basic source code for me. So now we can continue working with this controller, but I would be removing all this because this is actually created for me just as some sample methods. I don't use this on this case, so I'm going to be removing it from here. And now let's take okay, I'll be copying and pasting it from this other window, and let's take a look at what this is actually doing. So first of all, I need to fix this using statement. Here we go. Okay, so notice in here that we have added a private read-only instance variable. This is for the iCustomerSelect service. This is calling an instance of the service. And we have right here the constructor event passing in the service so that we can initialize it or instantiate it. Then we would be using the HTTP verb get. We would produce a response type status code of 200 if everything went okay, and 500 if there was any internal server error. I will be returning an iData store on the open event or method of this controller. Now see that I have a try catch in here. So what I'm doing is declaring a new data store, and I'm actually filling this data store from calling the service open event or open method. Now if everything went okay, then I would be returning an okay with the data store of customers. If I had any exception, then I would be returning a status code of 500 with the error message. So then I can continue saving this. Now let's get back to the startup remember that in the startup I told you that we would be leaving a space right here. So this is so that we can continue by adding the dependency injection. So let's do that. Services at scoped, scoped, here it is, and I'll pass in the, okay, I'm missing one of the using statements, so let's add it in here. It's using order demo dot services and or using order demo dot services dot, yeah, there we have it. Okay, so getting back in here, IW customer select service and W customer select service. So I have passed in the interface and the service itself. Now that it has been made available, I can continue using this method right here. So now that we have the method done and we have everything completed, let's take a look and see how this is actually doing. So let's test this out. I'm running the app, the web API. Okay, let's just give it a couple seconds for this to load. And there we go. Now let's open this, and remember the name of the controller was W customer select, and the method is open. So let's try this. Here we have it. Now you see that this is the data window that I was actually loading. So this is the first data window from PowerBuilder that I actually want to use. Now let's continue by creating the rest of the services, controllers, and everything else that I need. So now that I have this, I can close all this up. And let's continue by creating the rest. So I'll create a new interface right here. Let's add a new interface. And this interface will be named IW order main service. So let's copy this right in here. Here we go. Now let's put in the using statements it might be requiring. Remember that this PowerBuilder has changed. It's actually going to be dwnet.data. That has already been placed in there. I'll copy in the methods we would be using. Here we go. There they are. So I'm saving this. Now let's continue by creating all my service for this one. So it's IW order main service. So I will be creating a new service for that. So let's add a new class right in here. And let's name it as we need it to. So W order main service. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to be copying and pasting the code so this video doesn't go too long. Here we go. Now remember, this is WNet data. Here you have it. And there it is. Now let's take a quick look into what this service is actually doing. So you can see it's creating a new Appian data context right there. We have its constructor method passing in the data context, initializing the instance variable. Now the first method it has, it's returning an iData store. This is a data store, C# data store or .NET data store. And the first method is DW order item UE retrieve. So this is a user event retrieving. Notice how it's accepting a string of the customer number and the order number, and creating a data store, passing in the data object and the data context, similar to SQL CA. Now I would be doing the retrieval right in here, passing in the arguments and returning the data store. So as you can see, basically all the same is happening right in here, the DW order UE retrieve method as well. Now we have some other examples to go in here. So notice that this is actually using SQL Executor. This is taking advantage of what we already have from PowerBuilder code, and that is because we are actually using some embedded SQL in PowerBuilder. So this got translated, and let me show you how we can actually do that. So if I open right in here, should be one of these ones. Let's see if it's this one. Okay, now let's look at the method. The the W order UE retrieve. Here it is. Okay, so notice in here how we are looking into the methods, and one of them has a delete right in here. So this is what we actually would be passing into our service. So notice how it's already done in here. Now we can see the post open event. It's right in here. So well, it's doing a retrieval to the customers, and there we go. So now let's continue by creating the controller. Add new item. Let's name the API controller, and let's look for the corresponding one. It's W order main controller. So let's name this accordingly. There we go. Okay, saving this, and here it is. Now let me just copy and paste, and we'll look into the code in just a second. So let's look into what I might be missing, changing this to the correct one. Here we have it. There we go. Okay, so now you'll notice that we have the route of the web API. It's a web API, and the controller would be W order main, as you can see right there. The action would be the actual method I'm calling, and this is an API controller. It's based or inherited from the controller base. I'm declaring a private instance variable for the service, and on the constructor event I am actually initializing this service. Then we set up the HTTP get verb. It produces a response type of status codes 200 if everything went okay. If any internal server error happened, we have a status code 500. This would be returning a string, and we will be catching or accepting a string for the customer number and a string for the order number. Now notice how this is a try catch in here, and first we are setting up a data store, and it would be accepting what it comes returned from the W order item UE retrieve method from the service, passing in the customer number that we catched from here, and we accepted from the method, and the order number as well. If everything went well, we're going to be returning status code 200 and exporting it as JSON, and this would be the normal JSON. This is plain JSON that we would be accepting. So if we had any exception, anything went wrong, we would be returning a status code of 500 with the error message as well. So if you look into the next ones, you'll see that they're basically the same. They're doing basically the same. So this is actually very simple. I'll save this and continue creating the other services and controllers. So now let's continue with the next interface. Let's create another interface in here. Add the new interface, name it. Okay, now in this interface, let's copy up everything and paste it in here. We'll see a little bit more about the details of the service in just a second. So I would be saving this. Notice how there are no error messages. Okay, I'm sorry, I did miss one. So let's fix it by clicking here and adding the corresponding using statement that I was missing. So I have already saved this. Now that let's create the corresponding service for this. It's modify service. Okay, let's go in here and add a new class. Now this class, let's name it accordingly. There we go. Okay, I would be copying and pasting everything so we can just go through it real quick and simple. So there we have it. Okay, let's see if I'm missing something. Yes, I'm actually missing something, and you can see it's actually telling me that there is something right here. So let's fix this by adding the using statement it is looking for. There we go. Okay, it's already been fixed. So now this method, it's a little bit more complex if you look into it, and you can see that we are creating again the data context inside of it, similar to SQL CA. We are initializing this data context in the constructor event. Now for the first method, we are returning a short value, and we are accepting strings for the column name, the data, and this is an out variable. It has a product, it's bool, and returning also the product. Now you can see that this is a more elaborate case. You can step all the way into it and take a look at what it's actually doing using the SQL executor, selecting one, and all this is a very good example of how to do some very complex or more complex scenarios and cases. You can download all this source code if you want to from the links I mentioned to you. So let's just continue working on this. Notice how this is actually telling me that there is something wrong right here, and this is telling me that it has been deprecated, and that is because on the previous release it used this, but on the new release, since this is a beta version, let's do it as it actually requires. So this is actually a property, so let's put in the context, and there we go. So this should be right in here. So order items is the same case. Set data context, let's see, data context equals context. So there we have it. Now we can continue. So it seems that I have that wrong, so let's get this fixed, and let's comment out these lines, and it's not set, it's just data context. There we go. Okay, that looks better. So let's continue. We have now created the service. Now let's continue by creating the corresponding controller for this. So let's go and add a new data context. The new controller. And let's copy and paste this controller just in a second. Here we have the name of it, and let's place in the name in here. There we go. Okay, so I will be copying and pasting this, and I'll show you in just a second what all this is about. Let's first of all fix this right there. Okay, so now let's take a look again. Once again, this is another controller, and we're creating a private read-only variable. This is an instance variable of the corresponding service. We are now making a constructor right in here, and we're passing in the service, initializing the instance variable with it. But in this case, we are using the HTTP post verb. So this is going to be returning a status code of 200 if everything went okay. If some error happened, then we will be returning a status code of 500. Now this one would be returning a data packer, and this is very interesting because we're actually going to be packaging the data windows inside of this object. Then we can extract them in PowerBuilder if we wanted to. So this would be actually receiving a data packer as well. It's a data package. This is a JSON package. This has been sent by PowerBuilder. We'll look into that in just a moment. So I'll be accepting this in here. So notice how we're actually getting the column from the data packer and the data right in here, doing a try catch for exception handling. Now notice this right here, squiggly line. It's because I'm missing a using statement. So let's click on here, and there we go. It's already been fixed for me. So there you see that it's executing the business logic by calling in the service, passing in all the parameters that it requires. After that, it creates a new data packer object, and it packages the values of the result and the values of the hash product. These are the values that came back from here. Okay, so now let's take a look. If everything succeeded, it's because the result was equal to 1. Then we can add the values that we might want right in here. If everything was okay, we can return a status code of 200 with the packer object. Any exceptions we catch, we'll return the status code 500 with the error message from it. Now everything else, it's basically the same as the ones we have seen before, so I won't jump too much into those, so we can just continue with the next steps. So now we are missing one more interface. So this interface is for the new service. So I'm going to click here and I'll be creating a new interface. I'll click in add new interface. I will name it accordingly IW order new service. Click OK, and here we go. So I would be copying everything from what I have had before and fixing again the using statements. There we go. Now I am missing another one right here, so let's add that in there, and there it is. So now let's create the corresponding service for this. So notice how this is a little repetitive, but they are different objects and each one of these objects is for a different purpose. Well, that's the nice thing about this, that you actually don't have to do a lot of it. You can just copy and paste back what you already had, and this simplifies everything. Now let's go over here and make sure that everything is okay. So let's fix this, and I see that I'm still missing something. I bet it's the D product. Yes, see, right in here. So let's fix this using the using statement. There it is. So now let's take a quick look into this just to make sure that everything's okay. So I've saved it. Now again, we're making the private read-only instance variable similar to SQL CA, creating a constructor, initializing that variable. Now let's take a quick look into the first method. Notice it's basically the same as the one before. You see? The next one is basically the same, but this one is using embedded SQL. See? Right in here. Now a nice feature of this is that notice this is specific to a certain database. If I were using any other type of database, this would be automatically transformed for me. So that is something very nice of this Snap Objects framework. So notice how this is telling me that there's something wrong. Remember that this has been deprecated in the next release. So let's put this as needed. Remember, this is a property now and it's not gonna be a method. So I'm gonna change this right in here like this, and basically the same for this one. There we go. Give it a second. There it is. So it's going to be needing a change as well in here. There it is, and let's remove this right here, and here we go. It's already been fixed for me. There we go. Okay, so let's look at this open method. Now notice that this is actually returning void. It's nothing else that I want to do from it. So it is accepting products and the categories, and it's actually going to be returning those as out variables. It's similar to what we have on PowerBuilder as a reference variable. So here we are actually creating a new order items data store, passing in the data context and the data object. We will be retrieving the data from the data window child right in here, getting the data window child, setting the data context, retrieving it, similar for the categories. And since this is an out variable, it's already been retrieved in there. This is going to be returning a volume, this next method right here. So we're actually going to be accepting data stores, as you can see right here, .NET data stores, and this would automatically and directly be assigning the data context to it, beginning the transaction, doing the updates to them accordingly. If everything went okay, then I can directly do the commit and return true. But if something went bad, then I would just do a rollback and return false. Let's take a look at another method right in here. Notice how this method is returning a string, but it's also accepting a string, the customer number. This customer number is a parameter that I would be passing in to my SQL select that I have in here. This is using the SQL executor and the scalar method. Remember that the scalar method is only going to be retrieving the first column of the first row, or the first row of the first column. So it's actually parsing it into an integer, and it is actually accepting nulls by putting this question mark in it. So if the max order number was null or was less or equal to 0, then we know that we can set the local variable to 1 for not valid. Otherwise, then we can set the format value of the order number and return the order number. There we go. So now let's continue by creating the controller that this requires. Okay, remember how we created the controller before? So it's basically going to be the same thing. So let's go here, API controller. There we go. Okay, I will be removing this in just a second, so let's copy and paste in here. And here we go. Let's fix any errors we might have. There we have it. Got it. Okay, now you see that I have the route in here. Remember that this is the route that would be forming the URL of my web API. Notice how I'm creating a new instance variable of the corresponding service. Then on the constructor event, I am initializing that service. Okay, so the first method is accepting a post verb. It would be returning a status code of 200, and it would also be returning a 500 internal error message. It's returning an iData packer, accepting a data unpacker. Remember, we'll look into this in just a moment. And unpacking the data from it, as you can see right here, doing a try catch. It will be catching the result from the open event right in here. We need to pass in all the parameters it requires. Then creating a new data packer and packaging all the values from the result and the has customer. And then if everything went okay, then I can just add a new order number 2. Return the packer with the status code of 200. If anything went bad, then I can return the status code of 500 with the error message. Okay, notice how on the next method we are accepting a post verb. So this is returning status 200 and 500. It is returning a data packer and accepting a data unpacker. So remember, this is a JSON package from PowerBuilder, or any package or any data or any JSON object from any other application, but in this case it will be meant to be used with PowerBuilder. So let's unpackage this, getting the column value and the data value, doing a try catch to catch the result by passing in all the parameters. Hey, notice this. Let's fix this. There we go. Nice. Okay, so then I create a new data packer variable in here. I would be adding the value, as you can see. If everything went okay, then I can continue packaging. Then return the package with a status code of 200, otherwise a status code of 500 with the error message. The next ones are basically the same as we have already seen. It's an HTTP GET verb, and this is returning a data packer. We're using the service open. Notice how we're passing in the product and the categories, and we're catching them back out. Then we would be packaging them as needed in here, returning the packer. There we go. So the next one is going to be another HTTP post verb right in here. I would be returning actually just the error messages in this case, but accepting a data unpacker. So I see the data store and creating a new data store named order, unpackaging it from this package I received. And notice how this is doing the get data store. That means that I packaged a data store inside of a JSON object. Similar for the order items. Now I would be saving, check if the modification was actually successful. If it was, then return just okay. Otherwise, return an internal server error. Now the next one is doing an HTTP verb method, and HTTP verb from this web API. So in this one we would be returning a string, but we are actually accepting a string again. So this would be returning the result of calling the method directly from the service. Notice how it's doing it right here. If anything went okay, it just returns that. Otherwise, it returns a status 500 with the error message. Okay, so we have this completed, but wait a minute. We are still missing the dependency injection of all of this. So let's continue by doing that. I'll continue by copying and pasting them right here so we can save some time by doing that. So I'll copy and paste in here. Here we go. Okay, there it is. Okay, so this is already set up. So now let's test my application within PowerBuilder. Now that this is completed, we can click right in here and then clean solution, and then we can build it. This is similar to doing an incremental build on PowerBuilder. So let's just give it a couple seconds and then we do a rebuild. This is like a full build in PowerBuilder. So once this is done, I can run my web API. So here we go. There we go. Okay, so now if I go into my PowerBuilder application, notice how this has already been refactored and we have already got this set up for us, and here is the getting of the URL, and I am passing in the controller name with the method it would be consuming. Then it would be doing the retrieval of the data window that I passed in using the URL that I just called. So let's test this out. Let's see if it's working properly. So I'm going to be running this. Hey, notice I got a message right here. Connection to database failed. Let's see why this is. Are we missing something? I bet you we are. So let's go here in the application object, double click on it. And what do you know? Do you see this? We're still trying to connect to the database, to the local database. So we forgot this. Let's comment this out, save this, and test this out again. So let's run it. There we go. Here's our application already running. So remember, you can download all this source code, follow along, and you can continue by looking into this tutorial if you're more interested in knowing how every single part of it is actually working. You can do so. And thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you had a great time with us in this session.